Okay, it is 7:16, so I'd like to begin our joint work session of the Zoning and Planning Commission and Planning Commission. And I'd like to thank everybody for being here. And I'd also like to thank the staff and the consultants who are also here tonight. And first on our agenda is always citizens communication. And so I have the cards in order. And remember that you have 3 minutes, and I'll call your name, and I'll also call who's next. First to go is, and I actually can't read this except for the last name of Rogers, but I can't read the first name. Curtis Rogers? Okay, and on deck is Thomas Ates. Yes.
Are we on?
Yes. Thank you, and you have 3 minutes.
Thanks. Good evening, and thank you for this time. I'm a resident of D3, and I'm concerned about the CodeNEXT draft as it pertains to Main Street zones, and specifically the parking around those zones. A couple of things I wanted to highlight. Number one, the required parking appears to be very burdensome for a small business that would like to move into the area. It appears that with the cost of land, the amount of parking we're proposing in this code is going to make it out of reach for small businesses, and it's going to be more favoritism towards large companies with deep pockets. Not that it's intended to do that, that's just what I'm predicting. Number two, out of all the transportation options that are available to us today, I'm afraid that what we're requiring of bars and restaurants to support their required parking, it seems like we're also encouraging drunk driving. Given that there's so many other options out there right now, it appears that the one that we're requiring of these bars and restaurants is the one that's going to put drunk drivers on our streets. From my discussions with city staff at the different events that I've gone to, I've asked them where the numbers come from for these parking requirements. I asked for data or research, and they've said there's really none. Now, that might not be true. I'd love to hear differently, but I can't find any data that's supporting these numbers as far as the numbers required for this parking. I would like you to please consider researching the amount of parking we're needing right now, and then also consider the direction that transportation is going and what we're going to be needing in the future. It would be great to have a code that attempts to predict how much parking we're going to need 10 years from now versus 10 years in the past. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Tommy Ates and Tina Barnett is next. Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Thomas Ates, and I'm a board member of the Friends of Hyde Park Neighborhood Association. In May 2017, Friends of Hyde Park voted in favor of applying a new land development code in which 91 Hyde Park residents out of our 403 members voted. 78% of the membership supported the resolution. However, Friends of Hyde Park opposes the current draft of CodeNEXT unless Hyde Park is included in CodeNEXT, as well as being a core contributing neighborhood to the strategic Austin housing blueprint, also allowing more missing middle housing, as well as providing additional zoning for new restaurants and walkable amenities in Hyde Park that are currently banned under the current land development code. Currently, in the CodeNEXT draft, much of Hyde Park is zoned as Neighborhood Conservation Combining District, or NCCD, and would be exempt from the new code. Regardless of the original intent, we believe NCCDs in the current code have proven to inhibit affordability, class, and racial diversity. We also believe protectionist zoning policies in favor of single-family homeowners, like NCCDs applied to Hyde Park and other neighborhoods, are a contributing factor to why much of our city's core housing has become out of reach for nearly most Austinites, save the upper middle class and wealthy homeowners. Because we are in Austin's affordability crisis, Friends of Hyde Park believes creating de facto zoning barriers to class and race is not a zoning code. It's actually a portrayal of Austin values. Friends of Hyde Park, the board, we consider that this result of CodeNEXT to benefit wealthy single-family homeowners at the expense of our endangered middle and working class as morally wrong. We will not endorse a CodeNEXT land development code which economically codifies the 20th century Jim Crow white-only deed restrictions in which Austin's first suburb was founded. As such, Friends of Hyde Park realizes Hyde Park has a special responsibility to address affordability and diversity in CodeNEXT. In the 21st century, the future of Hyde Park zoning must be a forward-thinking map which embraces missing middle housing and needed density to help grow a sustainable and diverse middle and working class in Austin. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next is Tina Barnett or Barrett? Barrett?
Yeah.
And on deck is Brennan Griffin, and you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tina Barrett. I live in District 7. I would like to address some of the fears about increasing density with CodeNEXT by using an example of a lot in Rosedale, which is my neighborhood. This lot cost about $360,000, and it had a 1930s home on it. It was torn down and then had a house with a separate ADU built on the existing lot. At this point, those opposed to density would claim the developer is taking away existing affordable housing. I ask you to consider what was torn down: a 700-square-foot hovel with 1 bedroom, caved-in roof with moldy insulation falling down and covering the floor, an unstable foundation, and so on. Should people who can only afford lower-priced housing live in such unsafe, filthy environment if they want to live centrally in Austin? Obviously not. The solution is only to rehab or rebuild on this lot. To rebuild the 700-square-foot house would cost approximately another $200,000 to $300,000, which would have to be done by a developer since the house was not mortgageable. After the development, the best a buyer could do would be to buy a rehabbed 700-square-foot, 1-bedroom house for $560,000 to $700,000. This is definitely not affordable or even missing middle housing. The developer ended up building 2 homes. One sold for around $720,000. The ADU sold for around $450,000. These aren't great prices for affordability either. Regardless of what was built, this land cost around $360,000 2 years ago. It's even worse now. At best, with the current code, only 2 families could share the burden of the cost of this land. Let's consider what would happen if the developer could have built 4 or 5 units there. Sounds terrifying to those opposed to more density, but what is so scary about 4 or 5 more families moving into a neighborhood like Rosedale and not to East Austin? 4 or 5 families sharing the cost of the land and making it affordable for themselves. 4 or 5 more families moving to Rosedale and not to the far suburbs, which would require them to get on Mopac or I-35 and drive everywhere they go, making traffic worse. 4 or 5 families would find new neighbors and start walking to the amenities of a highly walkable neighborhood. How is this destroying neighborhood character? How are these hypothetical families any less deserving of a life in Central Austin? Is it because they didn't buy 20 years ago? Is it because they don't make enough money to afford it now? Are we really going to be a city that forces these people out to the edges, or worse, force them to displace even lower income families trying to make it in East Austin? I hope as you consider CodeNEXT, the answers to these questions will be as obvious to you as they are to me, that Austin is a city for everyone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And next up is Brennan Griffin, and on deck is Kevin, and I know I messed up your name last time, McLaughlin? So please go ahead.
Hi, my name's Brendan Griffin. I'm the Deputy Director of Texas Appleseed. I came up here a few weeks ago to speak with UT Law Professor Eliza Platt Mills. We were also speaking on behalf of Austin Tenants Council and the Texas Low Income Housing Information Service. We'd all signed a joint letter around some of the issues we were seeing with the density bonuses and fair housing in CodeNEXT. We have not had a chance to review as a group the new draft, so I'm not going to speak on behalf of the whole group. I'm going to try and talk a little bit more from my personal experience and talk a little bit more about fair housing. We spent a lot of time on the density bonus last time, but fair housing goes beyond sort of capital A, capital H, affordable housing. It goes to making sure that all of the barriers to opportunity for protected classes, African Americans, Latinx people, people with disabilities, families with children, all those protected classes have a chance to live in high opportunity areas. And that's not just limited to affordable housing. So I want to talk very clearly about displacement. There's been a lot of discussion about whether CodeNEXT is going to increase displacement. There's been a lot of talk about the 7 to 10,000 units that they see being demolished to build new housing, which is the biggest fear I have on displacement, backed up by the data, is more with renters who are now in market rate affordable housing. I lived in an apartment building until 2 months ago that is a 1961 apartment. Half the units were market rate affordable, and half of them were upfiltering. I don't know if you're familiar with this term. This is when an apartment building, because of the market, can put in some washer-dryer unit hookups, maybe some new cabinets, some new countertops, and raise the rates of those rents for those units by $200, $300 more a month. When I was looking at apartments a couple of months ago, for me and my son, the units in that apartment that had 1961, not particularly well-maintained building, had half of them market rate, half of them not. The ones that had upfiltered were pretty much the same price as the ones in Elon East on Manor Road. That was a new building. I think it was built 2 years ago. That they're maybe $25 a month difference, 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms. So what happens if you don't build enough multifamily and you have a lot of people moving into a place like Austin is the market rate starts to upfilter. And that happened in Cherrywood, all those apartments on Manor, MLK. Those older apartments have already upfiltered and are pretty comparable in price to the new apartments. And if you don't build enough new apartments to cater to this population, you don't get everything else starts to upfilter. So we really need to make sure that we're building enough market rate in as
Thank
well
you very
as affordable
much.
everywhere around in Austin. So,
Okay, Kevin McLaughlin has 3 minutes, and Frank Herren is on deck.
Hi, I'm Kevin McLaughlin, and I live on 38th and Guadalupe. I want to start today by asking everyone to take a moment and think about what's special about your neighborhood. Is it that every house is approximately the same height? Or that everyone has a long enough driveway for exactly 2 cars? Or that our front lawns are all about the same size? Or is what's special about our neighborhoods the people who live in them? If you're like me, it's the people that matter. But our current code, and unfortunately the latest draft of CodeNEXT, insists that it's the similarity of our buildings that are most important. To put it another way, if we can't build more and different kinds of housing everywhere in Austin, then the cost of rent will rise everywhere in Austin. And eventually, the only people who will be able to live in the houses our code protects so dearly are the very wealthy. If you think that the people are what's most important about our neighborhoods and our city, then we need a CodeNEXT that makes sure that at least 40% of new homes are either triplexes, fourplexes, sixplexes, or row homes. If we really want to fix our traffic problems, then we need a code that doubles the amount of people who can get to work by some other method than car. And if we're serious about fair and affordable housing, then at least 75% of the land area in every urban core neighborhood must be eligible for realistic affordable housing density bonuses, as called for in the 2016 Fair Housing Resolution. In short, we need a code that lets our neighborhoods breathe and grow instead of strangle and die. We need a code that values people and opportunity instead of dirt and bricks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I'll refrain from clapping. I thought what the Planning Commission does with the waving of the hands is very cute. And okay, Frank Herren, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And you have 3 minutes. And on deck is Michael Floyd.
I was watching Morning Joe this morning, and the panel was talking about the politics of gun control. One of the panelists made a statement that really caught my attention and seemed to get consensus agreement around the table. That statement was that in our society today, politics has superseded basic humanity. To me, that statement is at least equally applicable to zoning and housing policy. What level of affordability do we want for our neighborhoods? What would be transformational, as Mr. Vela described it a couple of weeks ago? There's no rule of thumb about what level of affordability we can expect based on land cost. And that is that the final product must be priced at least 3 times the land cost in order to pencil out. It used to be 4 to 5 times. Well, a search of residential lots in zip codes 02 through 05 this afternoon produced a median lot cost of $499,900. That means that at 40 units an acre, the starting price point would be $300,000. At 20 units an acre, half of that density, the starting price would be $600,000, and it goes up from there. So far in this process, we've been talking in the general area of 12 to 16 units an acre in our neighborhoods, or a price point equivalency of about $750,000 and more. The effect of time is not being considered. Density only is added very slowly, one property at a time. And each time we build a house at a low density, that house is going to be there for 60, 80, even 100 years. You don't go tear down a 20-year-old home in order to replace it with something else. You not only have to have an adequate degree of density, you have to have enough of it to meet demand. And we don't and we won't. Just to accommodate the current gap, the need today of income-restricted housing, we would have to find sites for 2,000 25-unit apartment projects. That doesn't even begin to address market housing or future growth. It's basic humanity. Do we include people? Are we fair to people? Do we allow them to live in our neighborhoods, or don't we? And then there's politics. 4 council members have already publicly pledged to decide this code on the level of basic humanity. I believe that more council members will join them soon, and my ask of you is that you join them as well, particularly those of you who were appointed by those 4 council members. I would ask those of you who think your council members are possibilities for joining that group of 4, please talk to them and see if they would support you making that same pledge.
Thank you.
Basic humanity versus politics.
Thank you, Mr. Herren. And our next speaker is, oops, I put people out of order, is Michael Floyd. And then on deck is Liza Wimberly. Okay, and you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Michael Floyd, a member of All Saints Episcopal Church, speaking on behalf of Austin Interfaith. And there are several other members of our organization here with me this evening. Over the course of decades, Austin Interfaith has engaged with tens of thousands of citizens as a nonpartisan, broad-based organization of 36 congregations, schools, and nonprofits working for the common good. The organization represents thousands of families who live, work, and worship here and is responsible for the establishment of Austin institutions like Capital Idea, primetime after-school programs, and summer youth employment. In recent years, Austin Interfaith has focused on affordable housing. For example, working with Oak Creek Village residents to save 173 affordable housing units, and with residents of Hidden Valley High Meadows to preserve the affordability of close to 500 mobile homes. We protected affordability for over 1,200 Austin residents. Recently, we've been hearing stories from all over town telling how living in Austin is unaffordable for families with children and for seniors paying ever higher property taxes on fixed incomes. Neighborhoods around congregations in East and South Austin have been replaced with condo canyons, pushing low-income and communities of color to Round Rock, Manor, and Bastrop, even as they continue to work and worship in Austin. The Austin Interfaith Affordable Housing Team has met with experts from a variety of backgrounds, including planners, a member of the Citizens Advisory Group on CodeNEXT, council district offices, and former council members. We are submitting to you, Commissioners, and to the City Council a 2-page preliminary statement of principles that articulate the priorities of our constituents and concrete ways we think CodeNEXT can better reflect the affordable housing goals of our city. I believe this has been passed out to you. The statement articulates general principles that would apply to any version of CodeNEXT, but we call this our preliminary statement because we know there's still one more version of CodeNEXT to come, and in the process, the details might change. We won't read aloud our entire statement here tonight, but we do want to highlight 4 things. First, Austin Interfaith believes that, at a minimum, CodeNEXT should reflect the City of Austin's own affordable housing goals as a priority. Second, by granting by right density as an entitlement, the city is giving away our only tool or leverage to expand affordable housing options. Density entitlements above and beyond those allowed in the present code should come with corresponding affordable housing benefits. Third, public accountability in the zoning process is still a necessity. Code change requests that negatively impact affordable housing stock should come before the appropriate commission and before City Council. Code variance requests involving the sale of alcohol near schools should come before the council. Right. Fourth, Austin residents should be given enough time to read and provide feedback through public hearings to make the process truly transparent and permeable. Presentations by staff and consultants should not replace substantive opportunities to hear community response. In sum, Austin Interfaith believes that communities of people of color, older residents, and families with children, and people of modest means should be able to live and work in all sectors of our city. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, and I hate to interrupt a man of the cloth. Thank you very much. Okay, Liza Wimberly. I'm forgiven. I feel very blessed. Thank you. Okay, Liza Wimberly, and then Stuart Hirsch is next.
Hello, I'm Lisa Wimberly. I live in District 7, and in Rosedale. I've been a homeowner for 20 years. And I believe that we need a bold, visionary overhaul of our land use rules to make Austin more environmentally friendly, more livable, and more affordable to our working families and the next generation of Austinites. The release of Draft 2 made it clear that the consultants and staff have not risen to the task of making meaningful strides towards these goals. Fortunately, there is still time to make this right for all Austinites. We must encourage construction of new housing stock in Central City where people want to live. We must add a significant amount of missing middle housing, triplexes, fourplexes, sixplexes, and row homes. They are the cheapest to build and by far the more affordable housing than the single-family sprawl that comprises the vast majority of our metro area and urban core. We must make Austin more affordable by affirmatively furthering fair housing. At least 75% of the land area in every urban core neighborhood must be eligible for a realistic affordable housing density bonus, as called for in the 2016 Fair Housing Resolution. We must get people out of their cars and into alternative modes of transportation that alleviate Austin's gridlock and reduce carbon emissions. We need zoning that takes the share of solo trips by car below 50% in the next 10 years. CodeNEXT Draft 2 makes some incremental progress towards these goals. It allows construction of ADUs in more places, and it allows residential uses in commercial zones. But despite these improvements, we're still a long way away from the above goals. By consultants' own admission, the new draft adds only half as much new housing units to District 9 as it does in District 1. This allocation of housing capacity continues to push development out of Central Austin into East Side. Only 18% of the projected new units under Draft 2 are missing middle housing. That's a small improvement over the status quo, but it is not the bold reform we need. For the most part, missing middle is still missing. The wholesale downzoning from Draft 1 to Draft 2 of transition areas near our transit corridors makes any meaningful transportation mode shift mere wishful thinking rather than achievable reality. Cities and neighborhoods are not meant to be encased in amber. They're growing dynamic entities. If we do it right, CodeNEXT can give Austin the tools it desperately needs to allow our neighborhoods to provide enough homes for the next generation and to make a meaningful impact on our environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Stuart Hirsch, and after Stuart Hirsch is Josiah Stevenson. Sorry about that.
Is this on? My name is Stuart Harry Hirsch, and like most in District 2, I own my own home. We are a 52% home ownership district. And according to my council member's office, our median family income is $36,000 less than the city median family income. So, and more than 50% of the renters in our district are cost burdened. I want to talk about density, because neither 2.0, 1.0, or Code Now, as my council member calls current code, gets us the density we need. I live in 78745, which has 58,878 people living in it, compared to some of the adjacent zip codes where there are a few as 7,000 people living in it. So I'm going to look at the code and see what does this do in relationship to others. You are looking at the wrong document. Our code before the 80s was 70 pages long on zoning. It had 5 zoning districts and 5 height and area districts, and this needs to be the base document you're working from. And I've said this before, and it appears to be getting no traction, so I will continue to say it until it does. The local newspaper thinks we need a definition of affordable, and that's only because they can't do a word search for reasonably priced, which has been our definition for affordable since 2000, and it needs to be changed because it doesn't have an asset component, so we get people moving from other parts of the country with $100,000 in the bank accessing our scarce affordable housing. I want to remind you that there's a petition going on in this town, and that Lyndon Johnson wrote in his book, The Vantage Point, that the Fair Housing Act was fixing to fail in 1968 until Dr. King was killed, and then he finally could get it out of the House, and it was approved in April of 1968, which will be exactly 50 years later. We'll be taking up CodeNEXT. But I will tell you what happened in Austin, because you need to know this about the referendum. On October 19th, 1968, voters in Austin voted to repeal what the city council had courageously enacted just a few months earlier, which was Austin's first fair housing ordinance. And the majority of voters who showed up in the October election in 1968 voted to repeal fair housing, and we didn't get it for a couple of decades on the local level. We said the federal law was good enough, we weren't going to use local resources. We have a history of racism. We lead the nation in economic segregation. And what you've been handed as a work product by the staff and by the consultants to date will reinforce that. We could be using UNO, the University Neighborhood Overlay, as a model for getting affordable housing and multifamily all over the city, and we have chosen not to for no good reason that I could figure out. And the Planning Commission resolution that was supposed to make it possible for us to use MF6 entitlements on MF2 lots that are income restricted hasn't come to public hearing yet. So I am extremely frustrated, as you can tell, and I'm going home to watch baseball because I think that has as much impact on the process as my presence.
No song?
Thank you.
Thank you. No song tonight?
I have a new one, but it'll break out in another session.
Okay.
Josiah Stevenson is next, and then Mary Sanger after him.
My name is Josiah Stevenson.
Oh, sorry. Apologies.
That's okay. And I live in the so-called non-neighborhood planning area called Triangle State in the north end of District 9. 2 weeks ago, I reminded you all of the criterion against which Imagine Austin mandates that you weigh the new code. Will this make Austin a compact and connected city? I'm on the board of Aura, and we've been reading the code. We're still reading the code, but already it's clear that the answer to that question for Draft 2 is that it doesn't even get us close. But if we have a mile to go between the status quo and compact and connected Austin, this isn't a code that gets us half a mile or a third of the mile. This is a code that gets us an inch. The most common color on the map for my district, including my building, actually, is gray. For F25. This means the zoning is directly pulled forward wholesale from the old code. It's the same code that's currently suffocating Hyde Park and other parts of Central Austin. It's the same code that's causing Central Austin rents all over the city, including my own, to skyrocket, forcing more and more people further and further out to the periphery of our city. We need the capacity for more homes where more and more people are trying to live. In particular, Aura calls for 150,000 new homes on the ground in District 9, my district, over the next 10 years. Whether consultants' projections or whatever, we're slated to get less than 20,000, which is a lot less than are slated to go into District 1. And for District 9 in particular, that's an order of magnitude too low. To get 150,000 on the ground, actually on the ground in 10 years, that means entitlements for 2-3 times that, almost 500,000, and you can't get there by maintaining the broken status quo. You can't get there, we can't get there by leaving half the district completely unchanged and adding maybe 1 unit for every lot for the other half, or actually half of the other half. We need bold, visionary reform to make this a compact and connected Austin for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mary Sanger is next, and Jennifer Houlihan is on deck.
Well, I have a lot to say, but I'm going to refrain. I live in District 9. I've been in District 9 for a long time. But I'm going to talk today not about the lack of time we have to review and think about the code and talk about it with our neighbors, nor am I going to talk about displacement of our residents, both old and renters in District 9 under the new code. I'm just going to simply tell you about ADUs. As your colleague here, Jim Duncan, has pointed out, we do not have in the new code, or the Draft Code 2 nor Draft Code 1, a best practice ADU. And in 2015, if you all will remember, the City Council went from 850 square feet for an ADU to 1,100 square feet ADU with absolutely no real reasoning behind it except there was a lobby force. But at this point, there is the cost for an ADU is somewhere around $120,000 according to the architects at the University of Texas. I would suggest that we reduce the size of ADUs to 850, which Mr. Duncan has shown to be the best practice from San Diego, from Denver, from Phoenix to Miami, which is much lower, and I hope you all will consider that. On the other issues, I'll remain silent tonight, but I hope you all continue to work.
Thank you very much. And then next is Jennifer Houlihan, and our last public speaker or citizens communication is Dusty Harshman. So thank you, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Jennifer Houlihan. I live in District 5, the south end with the cows and the fireworks stands, not the fancy end. I'm here to talk to you tonight about the live music capital of the world. Both the Imagine Austin Comprehensive Plan and the Code Prescription on Household Affordability reference the need for regulations to sustain and strengthen the music and arts industries and communities. To that end, it is my hope that when we get a final code, understanding it is still a work in progress, thank you for your service, that the final code will protect existing cultural assets and promote new ones, will support housing and jobs for musicians and artists, and will sustain these important elements of our local economy. To that end, I have 2 specific recommendations I'd like to make. The first is that arts and music culture be added to the purpose statement of general planning standards. It can be as simple as a clause saying, and to sustain the local arts, music, and culture communities and industries. Doesn't have to be a long addition. But I believe a several billion-dollar industry made up of people who are working for tips and minimum wage deserves a spot in the purpose. And I would also like to recommend a couple of specific things that have been approved already by the Economic Development Department, the Music Commission, the Arts Commission, and were part of the Mayor's Omnibus for the music and creative ecosystem here in Austin. First is to allow artists to sell their finished goods from their home live and work studios, specify in which districts that may happen. Second, in designated town and regional centers and activity corridors, allow density bonus rules to trade greater building entitlements for including live music venues or other forms of performing arts on the first floor, or for preserving iconic venues on that tract. Third, describe the basis for designating arts districts similar to the guidelines that we already have in place for designating historic districts in neighborhood plans, neighborhood centers, town centers, regional centers, and target one or more arts districts per council district. There deserves to be arts in every one of our council districts. Then I would ask that you consider establishing capacity rating for theater and arts venues and considering how the venue is used in addition to simply its square feet. Adding explicit definitions that clearly distinguish types of arts and music spaces for flexible and hybrid uses in city ordinances and other regulations. And finally, to adopt the agent of change principle and codify that. Thank you.
Thank you. And our last speaker is Dusty Harshman.
Chair, may I?
Yeah.
May I ask
no.
if she could send her comments?
Okay, yeah, and that should pertain to everybody, okay, that they can send their comments. Okay, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you all for your civic leadership. My name is Dusty Harshman. I live in the compact, connected, and culturally rich part of District 9, known as the Miller neighborhood. You know, as we progress through this process towards a form-based code, there's a balance. The balance certainly includes zoning. It also includes street design. And I'm here just to suggest that you continue to exert your civic leadership. As last week, the fire department made an attempt to construct a standard 25-foot clearance on all roads. And in many of our what we perceive to be Austin's next urban form, the Grove, Miller, Colony Park, we've utilized much smaller road design, in fact, in the name of safety. So you have the fire department suggesting in the name of safety they need a wide road. And through our experience, we have an equal suggestion that narrow roads are safer. So anyway, as that was being proposed, it was without significant public process. Thankfully, there has been enough delay and calmer heads to suggest one may avail itself. And I'd like, as commissioners, I'd like each of your commissions, well, particularly planning, to bring the fire department out and let's discuss this in the light of day, as opposed to sliding it in under a fire code. So, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And that concludes the citizens communication part of our meeting. And now I will pass it over to Jerry Rusthoven, city staff. And there are he will introduce the speakers, the consultants.
Just the first slide.